Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. It's been more than 6 hours since the Income Tax Authority started carrying out a survey at BBC India offices in the national capital and also in Mumbai. According to government sources, surveys at the BBC premises are in connection with alleged tax evasion and irregularities. The tax authorities have insisted that these are neither raids nor searches, only surveys technically that are being conducted as of now. Remember, this does come weeks after BBC released a 2-episode series on Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the first episode, with a major focus on 2002 Gujarat riots, raised so many objections in India, the government eventually banned the circulation of the links in India. Twitter and YouTube were also ordered to take down the links to the documentary. Not surprising then, the surveys at BBC offices have become a full-blown political controversy, with Congress, TMC, Aam Aadmi Party, Samajwadi Party, the entire opposition per se, saying that BBC is paying the price for being critical of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The ruling BJP, of course, has slammed the opposition. They've also surprisingly come out with a very full frontal attack on the BBC itself, calling it corrupt and biased against India. Is BBC being targeted for airing the documentary related to Prime Minister Modi, or is the central agency just doing its job? And could this snowball into a diplomatic face-off, given the BBC is state-owned in the UK? We'll take those questions to our guests in just a bit. Why are the income tax authorities surveying the BBC offices in Mumbai and Delhi? This is what the government sources, the income tax department sources are telling us, and they've levelled some major allegations against the British broadcaster. So the government sources say that this survey is in view of deliberate non-compliance, and this non-compliance is in relation with transfer pricing rules. Transfer pricing rules ensure that transaction between related parties is at a price that would be comparable if the transaction was happening between unrelated parties. Importantly, the tax department is saying that there has been persistent non-compliance with rules for years by the BBC India. And this one is also key. They say several notices have been issued to the BBC in the past, so this is not sudden, and this is possibly the biggest defense to say that this is not related to the documentary released recently. They've also accused the BBC of being defiant and non-compliant. Another charge is that the BBC has diverted their profits outside of India. The tax department is looking into manipulation of prices for benefits by them as well. And they have also clarified that such surveys are conducted on a routine basis. They're nothing out of the ordinary. The BBC has only released a very short statement today. They just came out to say on public platforms as well that income tax authorities are currently at BBC offices in New Delhi and Mumbai. We are fully cooperating. We hope to have this situation resolved as soon as possible. The opposition, though, has launched an all-out attack on the Prime Minister and the BJP government, saying that the government and the Prime Minister continue to brazenly show India's slide into dictatorship. The BJP has hit back and asked why is the likes of the Congress party always standing with, quote, anti-nationals. They've termed the BBC anti-India. Opposition has also claimed that the BBC offices are being raided because of this documentary, which showed Prime Minister's role, alleged role in the Gujarat riots. But the BJP termed the BBC brushed, bakwas, cooperation. Opposition is targeting the centre, claiming those who speak the truth are today being hounded in India. The BJP trained its guns on the opposition and said that they are the ones who are defending the BBC, which has a black history and is full of anti-India agenda. The opposition called the IT surveys a predictable move of harassing anyone who refuses to fall in line. But the BJP has also come out to say that the IT department is working as per rule of law, and that's what it is, should be seen as. It is a bit rich, though, of the Congress especially to act holier than thou, particularly on this issue, and here is why. In 1970, Indira Gandhi government expelled the BBC for 2 years over, quote, negative portrayal of India in a show. In 1975, the BBC was amongst foreign media that was banned again by Indira Gandhi during the emergency period. In 2009, BBC was issued income tax notices under Section 148 of the IT Act. So even if we talk about tax-related issue, frankly, they've faced action under the UPA as well. And in 2015, let's not forget, their documentary on the Delhi gang rape case was also banned in India. The courts had upheld that ban in India. So this recent documentary is also not the first of its kind example. Given that history in mind, the big question we ask today: will it be fair to see this as a result of Gujarat riots documentary, or is there truly more? That coming up in just a minute.
हम जेपीसी की मांग कर रहे हैं अडानी के मामले में, और वहां सरकार बीबीसी के पीछे पड़ी हुई है। विनाशकाले विपरीत बुद्धि।
फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन पर और जो अटैक हुआ है, ये दुनिया में भारत की छवि को और खराब करने वाला है।
बीबीसी का जो इतिहास है, कलंकित, काला, द्वेष भावना से भारत के खिलाफ कार्य करने का रहा है। और कांग्रेस पार्टी को सबसे पहले तो ये याद करना चाहिए, देश की प्रधानमंत्री श्रीमती इंदिरा गांधी जी ने खुद बीबीसी पे बैन लगाया।
Let's go across to the guests joining us. Tohin Sinha from the BJP, Advocate Matthew Antony from the Congress Party, Tushar Gupta, Senior Editor, Swarajya Magazine, Prabhu Dayal is former diplomat and also a signatory against the recent BBC documentary on Gujarat riots, Abhijit Iyer Mitra is Senior Fellow, Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. I want to begin with the Congress representative. Matthew, I've just enlisted the kind of action that the BBC has faced on their coverage in India, on their portrayal of India, and even on tax-related issue under Congress governments. So isn't it a bit rich today that you claim there is a murder of democracy when you've taken similar action before?
Shivani, the question comes here is, when the entire country and the parliament is asking for a JPC probe on a lakh crore plus corruption allegation against the Modi government, the government has trying to deflect it, with the BBC, which is also, let us clarify that, this is not an act against India by the BBC, but this is a BBC documentary which only kind of portrays what Mr. Modi has done in his individual capacity to complete his political aspirations or his political journey or to complete political ambitions there. So we should look into it objectively rather than going back to the 1970s and all of the things at this point of time.
No, but you're linking it to the documentary. You're linking it to the documentary today.
The BJP government.
No, one second. You're linking it to the documentary today. That's an assertion. That's not really a fact.
See, in the High Court, in the Supreme Court judgment also, the Modi has been cleared out of a criminal conspiracy, but the judgment also have a comparative note of comparing him to that of a Nero who was sleeping when the entire
No, you didn't understand my question. And Matthew, you didn't understand my question. You brought in the BBC documentary and you suggested that this is an attempt to somehow take the take the spotlight away from the Adani episode. That's a separate issue. But I'm saying that the Congress has come out and said that this is because the BBC documentary showed Mr. Modi in bad light. But that's not what, the agencies are saying, and there's no way to establish that except for this is your opinion.
See, on the IT income tax propositions on the transfer pricing and all of the things which we will not be able to make a qualified statement unless and until we know about the details of those details which is coming out.
Okay.
We don't have the details because, that is what they have given a statement. Transfer pricing is a very complex taxation issue. So we don't know that. Without knowing a qualified information on this, we will not be able to make a comment on the allegations.
Fair enough, but what
then,
gives the opposition
having
the
been
right?
said that, once
Fair
IT
enough. What
department
gives the
also makes a
opposition
claim,
the right to say that this is murder of democracy? Because the BBC showed some documentary which Indian government did not like. You've sent notices. By you, I mean the Congress party has sent tax notices to the BBC in the past. Indira Gandhi has banned it from India, booted it out of India. How is it that you are sitting in judgment?
See, I am not someone to comment on what happened in the 1970s at this point of time when we are in the 2020s. So there were reasons. The Calcutta issue was on the poverty portalization of India. They showed that one, and then it was not an act against Indira Gandhi at that point of time.
Okay.
It was about a city, and it's the French journalists kind of portrayed it against the country at that point. But this is particularly against an individual. It is not against a country. It is against Modi.
Well, some would argue when the Supreme Court has looked into these allegations, the Indian judicial system, and you're an advocate, has looked into these allegations for 20 long years. What business that a media company have to suggest exactly the opposite? Does that not bring down the institutional value? But I'll stay away from that. My business is not to discuss the BBC documentary today. I am just saying you've issued them tax notices in the past. So what heavens have fallen today?
No, I am not someone to kind of comment on the IT notices till the time we get the details of it. But then, having said that, the IT department is also saying that the BJP government has been issuing last 8 years, the country is having a BJP government. If there were 8 years of misrepresentation by the BBC, then why the tax raids now? Why couldn't it have been done earlier?
That's not an answer that any intelligent person can answer. Maybe the government can answer one day, but I'm not sure how that's a logical political argument. It's becoming a little banal to keep saying, oh, when you do something, why have you done this? If you've done this, something, the timing should be questioned. Or why now, not earlier? I'm not sure. But anyways, let me bring in other representatives as well. And I'll give Tuhin Sin of the BJP a chance to respond after we've heard almost everybody, because the government is in dock today. Let me go across to Prabhu Dayal, who's a former diplomat, also someone who very vociferously was a signatory to a very vociferous statement against the recent BBC documentary. Certainly, Mr. Dayal, the timing looks a little bit problematic. Now, obviously, the government agencies may not care about that, or they very much want to send a message down. But do you believe that this could indeed send a message that the BBC is being made victim because of what has transpired recently?
Well, as you yourself said, these are two different issues. Firstly, the BBC is a corporation. It's a company. And if it works in India, it has to follow Indian laws. If there is any apprehension that our tax laws or finance-related laws are being violated, then our authorities have the right to conduct surveys, as the Income Tax Department is doing, and see what evidence exists to indicate that some wrongdoing has been done in regard to taxation or such areas.
Yes.
Now, if your channel, for instance, were to work in another country, you would have to abide by local laws there.
Yes.
So it's not asking too much that the BBC should abide by our laws. Secondly, there is the question of the documentary. Yes, I was a signatory to a statement prepared by a number of senior bureaucrats, because we all feel that the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court, had given a clean chit to Prime Minister Modi. He had the Supreme Court had acquitted Prime Minister from all the charges that were made in that petition. So once the highest court of the land says something, I abide by it. I follow the directives and I follow the verdict of the highest court of the land. There is nothing wrong with that. That, as a citizen of India, I should do.
Okay. So, can I ask you very quickly, do you believe that because the BBC is indeed a state-owned company in the UK, this could also result in some sort of a diplomatic face-off?
Well, I won't say that the BBC is in any way a wing of the British government. If you recall, when that documentary was released and when news broke out about its contents, the British Prime Minister said, that the views contained in the documentary were not those of the British government.
Yes.
So how can we say that the BBC represents the views of the British government in this context? I would not go as far as to connect the two. The British Broadcasting Corporation is a corporation. It's a company and has to follow the laws of the land wherever it operates.
Okay. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, what do you think? Do you think that indeed perception will be whatever the agencies may say and whatever the government may say, whatever may be the history against the BBC in India and their tax-related issues in India, perception indeed will be that the government has acted to intimidate the BBC today?
Well, we are a free country and...
Sorry, Mr. Dayal, that's for Abhijit. That's for Abhijit. Yes, Abhijit, go ahead.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, that's what the perception will be, and that's what the narrative will be.
Yeah.
There's always been a problem with this government that they're never able to control the narrative very well. You see, unfortunately, what would have happened was if today ISRO had launched a rocket, the opposition would have come up with the charge saying the rocket was launched to take away from the Adani probe and the JPC, etc., etc. And, the problem is that narrative would also tick. It would get a lot of traction on social media and it would become the narrative. So, there's nothing we can particularly do about this. I think what's important to note out here is two things. First, is that what we're finding out today is that the BBC has been sent several notices prior in fact to the documentary coming out itself.
Yes.
Now, will the government's social media mechanism publicize this widely? Possibly, but will it get traction? I can guarantee you it will not get traction because, the left is much more smart at the social media game. The second issue we need to look at out here is there any special exclusion for anybody from tax laws or money laundering or whatever? Because, the problem out here is if a certain journalist who wrote a certain book money launders, it's automatically a purge against her by the government. It's the return of the second emergency. It's fascism. There is this belief that somehow if you're a journalist, you should be able to get away with money laundering, tax fraud, whatever. Note, nobody's been arrested. It's an investigation. Okay. And this is like saying you should not investigate a journalist, period. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Okay. I'll get Anthony to respond to in all of this in just a bit. But Tushar, your opening comments as well. I find it a little bit problematic. Maybe it's become a little passé that anything happens in India, we are told we no longer live in a democracy. By people who are very much functioning and speaking in a vibrant, messy democracy. Messy it is indeed, but it is a democracy. And I'm not sure how a tax survey at BBC office is supposed to tell us whether we live in a democracy or not.
Absolutely, Shivani. And an extension to what you're saying, I am unsure as to how every congressman is giving the BBC a clean chit. I mean, it's an IT survey, not an IT raid. First, there is a difference. Number two, they were sent enough notices on the issue of tax compliance and evasion before the documentary even came out. But for all those who are giving the BBC a clean chit today, how many of them know that the BBC has actually been investigated by the Royal and Customs Department of the United Kingdom government for tax evasion? In 2019, the BBC had to set aside £12 million just for the tax litigation purposes. In 2017, between April and September 2017, they paid £8.3 million just as an advance tax to settle any dues they were owing to the government. And this is because all the BBC presenters and radio jockeys and everyone, they were employed through special tax vehicles by the BBC so as to they could avoid paying the insurances, pensions, and whatever else is relevant in the United Kingdom. So this is a corporation we're talking about. Forget their editorial stance. That's irrelevant. But this is a corporation that's being investigated by the government of United Kingdom in the past, has been on the radar of several independent watchdogs in the United Kingdom. And here in India, everyone in the opposition wants to give them a clean chit. That is the part I do not understand.
Yeah,
and
I think it ties to what Abhijit has also said. One, there's a particular narrative that if you act against a journalist, even if it's not related to coverage, but other issues, somehow that's not done. But there's no immunity that you and I, we enjoy when it comes to tax issues, money laundering issues, etc. And second is that somehow the BBC is put at a pedestal in India, which it's possibly not even enjoying in its own home country.
Shivani, can I make a quick point?
Yes,
Just
yes,
a very
Abhijit.
quick
Yes,
point.
Abhijit.
Sudhir Chaudhary and the Z media are labeled Godi media. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that there were tax raids on, and those were raids, those were surveys on Z offices last year or last to last year. So, what was that? It's always a very selective choosing of just one party, one set of journalists. That's it. They don't want to look at the entirety of the image.
Okay.
Thanks.
Tohin Sinha, please come in here. Respond to what Matthew said first, that this is an attempt to divert from the Adani scandal.
Well, good evening, Shivani. I'm glad you used the word and very clearly specified that it's a survey and not a raid, because the Congress apparently has gone down in its IQ to such an extent that it won't understand the difference between a survey and a raid. And the survey is very specific to two or three issues. One is the anomalies in transfer pricing, the diversion of profit, and the BBC has apparently always been under the radar, both in UK, as Tushar just specified, and in India. So I think, it's an ongoing process. And in fact, just last week in Himachal, one of the properties of Adani Wilmar was apparently similarly surveyed. So was the Congress sleeping at that point of time? So I think, first of all, you need to, completely set aside the government from it. The tax authorities do their work independently, and they have every right to pursue cases which are ongoing, number one. And, even if they discover fresh cases, this whole thing about timing is very absurd. Just because, even if it coincides in some way with what BBC did last month, I don't think the tax authorities should be under any obligation to be nice to a repeat offender.
Okay, so the second question, which is tied to your first answer, is, which Matthew asked and he'll come in just a bit, is if there was such persistent non-compliance, the fact the note that we have received via sources is very stiff on the BBC. Why is it that the action is suddenly happening after the documentary comes out? What was the government doing all of this while?
We don't dictate the timing of the investigating authorities, and even if let's suppose the IT authorities discover some fresh anomaly, they have every right to pursue it without any obligation of being nice, just because, it may somehow seem that it's coinciding with what BBC did last month. Okay. So I think there needs to be a clear demarcation. The government is not a part of every action. The tax authorities have full freedom to pursue cases which are long pending and which have a history of their own.
Matthew.
And again, it's just a survey, mind you. We don't know what...
I'll buy your argument, and of course, we have to be careful not to call it a raid or a search, because in IT technical terms, there is a difference. But let me also add, in perception, in popular perception, frankly, to an average person, whether it's a survey or a raid or a search, it does not matter to him. We have to accept that. But yes, Matthew, come in.
Anchors like you need to...
Yes, Shivani. So I would like to answer and reinstate my arguments on this, that if this government, which is in power for the last 8 years plus, have seen irregularities from the BBC time and again, and the tax has got a clear-cut provision that after 3 years of assessments, you can't go back to them, why this government has gone to the BBC at this point of time, when they have made a documentary against an individual of this country who was a chief minister and now happens to be the prime minister, and it is not an act against India. So this is one particular question. Second is about, if at all, the government is so proactive in terms of acting upon the wrong taxation issues, then we have the Hindenburg report on Adani, which is calling out 88 versions of tax and fraud. Why the Serious Fraud Investigation Office of this country has not acted? Why the SEBI has not acted? Why the CAG has not acted? Why the government has not acted in any form to even make a research or an investigation, not even an investigation, at least to try and find out a fact-finding method on the research reports of the Hindenburg on Adani, which has taken the public money for a loot like a shit fund.
Let him respond now, Tohin.
If the government is so proactive on BBC, why the government is so reluctant to even talk on Adani when there is $100 billion plus?
Okay, Matthew, you've made your point. Let him respond.
Yes. Precisely the problem with the Congress party. Now they are doubling up like the spokesperson of the BBC. I am telling you, if you're not aware of the news, just do a Google search. Exactly 5 days ago, a similar survey had taken place in one of the properties of Adani Wilmar in Himachal Pradesh. Why didn't you?
I'm very much aware of that. So we are not saying that the tax department should not be doing this. But why now? Why they didn't do it earlier when there is a clear-cut law which gives an exemption to the tax avoiders if they are not done investigation within 3 years' time?
To personal cases which they deem right, irrespective of the political repercussions which they emanate, they are not responsible to, for the political repercussions.
Okay. Can I just bring in Tushar Gupta? I don't want to divert to the Hindenburg report or to the BBC documentary per se. Fundamental issue is that for some reason, any action by the government today is termed as one of the Congress spokespersons, I believe, said, sliding into dictatorship. I mean, this dictatorship charge, jibe, is this yielding result for the opposition?
Absolutely not, Shivani. And they have been doing this since 2014. They started in 2015-16 with the whole intolerance jibe, the country being unsafe for minorities and whatnot. It all fell flat in 2017, 2019 and 2022. And it looks like it will fall flat in 2024 as well. So the opposition is hell-bent on creating a perception. To some extent, they even succeed as well, as Abhijit pointed out. But in the larger scheme of things, it's not yielding them any results. And what the opposition today doesn't understand, the IT survey is going to make the finance department of the BBC corporation in India answerable. They're not going for the editorial stance, how difficult it is to understand. And one has to understand that the history, when it comes to tax avoidance of the BBC, starting with the United Kingdom, is quite shady. So if it's being investigated after several notices were given, where is the problem?
Okay. I found this on the web for...
Can I bring in Abhijit Iyer Mitra once again? We've had, I believe, the notices that were issued to the BBC earlier on tax-related issues. That case went on for quite some time, as most legal cases of this nature do. I believe they got a relief only in December 2022. The parameter also is that a lot of these investigations, right now this is a survey, it's not quite a raid or a full-fledged investigation. They do have to yield results too. Do you believe the government falls short of that mark when a lot of these probes, so quote-unquote, are launched?
Very frequently, Shivani, and that is, a big problem because we've seen a large increase in the size of our economic offences departments. The problem is that increase in size has not resulted in an increase in training or an increase in forensics or an increase in detective capacity, right? The average conviction rate is less than 1%. The average time that it takes for one of these cases to even get to court, I'm not talking about litigation time, just to get to court is 6 years, right? So there is a lot in this system that needs to be reformed. And, the problem is, of course, even after it gets reformed, it then becomes, it's a tool of oppression. So when you increase the size of the ED and things like that, it's a tool of oppression, quote unquote. Then if you bring in a statutory mandate on how long something should take in court, that also then becomes a tool of oppression somehow. Basically, every reform, according to certain parties, is a tool of oppression. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, we'll leave it at that. We're yet to, of course, see some sort of finality as far as this survey is concerned. We'll bring you more as and when this happens. I do thank all of our guests for joining us for our top story.